The Amazon stretched out beneath the Xylothian command ship like a sprawling sea of green. From high above, it was a patchwork of thick canopies and winding rivers, an ocean of life. But to Vesser 3 it was a playground, a place to conquer and claim. "This is it," he scoffed, peering through the ship's viewports. "A primitive hellhole. What could possibly be here to stop us?" His second-in-command, Zook 5, shifted nervously. "The humans, Commander. They know the land. This is their home." Vesser 3 smirked, dismissing the warning with a wave. "Please. They're nothing but ants beneath us. We've destroyed entire planet. This jungle won't be any different." As the Xylothian forces began their descent, they were unaware that the humans already knew they were coming. Their landing zones had been mapped, their approach anticipated. Sergeant Major Michael Ironclad Reynolds was already in position, crouched in the dense foliage, his eyes scanning through the infrared lenses of his helmet. His team was scattered across the jungle like ghosts, silent, deadly, waiting for the right moment. "Targets on the ground, Sergeant," came the voice of his second-in-command, Corporal Luis "Tank" Martinez, over the comm. "Xylothian transports down, and they're unloading troops." Reynolds nodded but didn't reply immediately. He could hear the hum of the Xylothian ship's engines fading into the distance. The jungle had swallowed it, just as it would swallow their forces. He wasn't going to rush into this. The Xylothians were confident, too confident. And that would be their undoing. The Delta Force team had trained in jungles like this their entire lives. They were experts at blending into the environment, using every vine, every rock, and every shadow to their advantage. The Xylothians thought they were invincible, armed with advanced technology and unmatched firepower. But they didn't understand Earth. They didn't understand the jungle. Reynolds' hand tightened around the grip of his rifle, his pulse steady. "All right, Tank," he said into his comms. "Wait for my signal. No shots until I say so." Minutes passed in absolute silence. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of creatures hidden within the dense underbrush. But Reynolds was calm. The Xylothians were coming. The time to strike was nearing. He spotted their first group, a dozen heavily armored soldiers emerging from the transport. They spread out, confident, laughing among themselves. One of them, tall, with a jagged scar across his face, held up a scanning device, searching the area for any signs of human presence. "Can't believe the Council's wasting resources on this planet," the scarred Xylothian muttered. "We'll be done here in a couple of hours. Earth's primitive jungles don't stand a chance against us." Reynolds' lip curled into a small grin. These idiots thought they were on a simple conquest. They were wrong. A soft rustle to his left caught his attention. He turned, meeting Tank's eyes through the foliage. The corporal gave a silent nod, his hand on the trigger of his own rifle, waiting for the word. Reynolds raised a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. The Xylothians were getting closer. It was time. With a swift motion, Reynolds signaled. "Now!" In the blink of an eye, his team sprung to life. The jungle erupted with movement, and in an instant, the Xylothian soldiers were under fire. The sound of suppressed shots rang out, and one by one, the alien invaders dropped without ever knowing what hit them. The soldiers' bodies hit the ground with sickening thuds, blood pooling beneath them. The jungle, for all its beauty, was now a deadly battlefield. Reynolds moved like a shadow, blending seamlessly into the chaos. He barely made a sound as he closed in on the remaining Xylothians. His rifle didn't miss. One shot, one kill. From a nearby tree, Tank fired at another group trying to flank their position. His shots were precise, calculated. Each one dropped a Xylothian before they even realized they were in danger. "Keep moving," Reynolds commanded over the comms. "We don't let them regroup." Within moments, the first wave of the Xylothian forces was neutralized. But Reynolds knew this was only the beginning. The Xylothians would send reinforcements. They always did. On the ground below, Vesser 3's voice crackled through the comms, furious. What is happening down there? Why are we losing men? Zook 5's voice quivered in response. We're under attack, Commander. The humans, they know the terrain. They're everywhere. Vesser 3's frustration turned into anger. How? They're supposed to be primitive. Get me reinforcements. Now. But it was too late. As Vesser 3 ordered more troops to land, the Delta Force team was already moving into position. They had anticipated the Xylothian response. Each step the aliens took into the jungle was a misstep, as their technologically superior forces were helpless against the humans who knew the land better than they knew their own starships. Reynolds didn't waste time. He knew they couldn't afford to give the Xylothians any room to breathe. Tank, take point, he ordered. The rest of you, stay low. We move in 10. They continued their silent advance, picking off Xylothians as they moved deeper into the jungle. But Reynolds wasn't content with just this small victory. He needed to send a message, not just to the Xylothians, but to anyone who might dare underestimate humanity. The jungle was alive around them, a living, breathing thing that was just as much an ally as it was a battlefield. Reynolds could hear the distant rumble of thunder in the sky as the first storm of the season began to roll in. It was a natural rhythm, the jungle's heartbeat, and he was in tune with it. As the storm grew closer, the Xylothians, now aware of the scope of their predicament, began to panic. The hunt was on, and Earth's elite warriors were always one step ahead. Vesser 3's forces had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated the jungle, and they had underestimated humanity. The dense undergrowth of the Amazon was a maze of shadowed paths and tangled vines, but for Sergeant Major Michael Reynolds, it was home, a place where he could hear the Earth's pulse and feel the jungle's breath. The storm clouds had rolled in, but instead of dampening the atmosphere, they intensified the feeling of anticipation. It was as though nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The Xylothians were out of their element. Reynolds crouched low against the trunk of a towering tree, his keen eyes scanning the horizon through his infrared optics. The rain hadn't started yet, but it was coming. He knew that it would make everything harder for the invaders. The Xylothian forces, with all their advanced technology, were unprepared for the relentless grip of the Amazon. They were used to high-tech environments, sterile, controlled, but here, in the wild, they were vulnerable. Sergeant, Tank's voice crackled over the comms. They're pushing harder now. Looks like they're regrouping. They're not gonna let up. Reynolds didn't respond immediately. He was thinking, calculating. The Xylothians were arrogant. That much was clear from the way they'd first underestimated the jungle. Now they were sending in more troops. He needed to take advantage of their overconfidence before they figured out how much they were outmatched. Reynolds tapped his earpiece. Tank, keep a low profile and monitor their positions. Don't engage unless they get too close. We're moving deeper. The comms buzzed in response. Copy that, Sergeant. A faint hum filled the air, and Reynolds knew the Xylothians were getting more reckless. The transport ships would be back soon, unloading more of their forces. The clock was ticking, but there was no panic in his chest. Only cold calculation. Everyone stay sharp, he muttered to himself as he rose from the tree, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. The game's about to get more interesting. The ground underfoot was slippery from the growing humidity, but Reynolds had learned how to use the environment to his advantage. He moved as if the jungle were an extension of himself, silent, swift, and deadly. His team followed behind, each soldier operating with a perfect understanding of the terrain, blending into their surroundings like shadows. Minutes passed, the rain now starting to drizzle down in sporadic bursts, making the jungle slick and treacherous. The Xylothians, thinking their technology would keep them safe, were oblivious to the humans closing in around them. They didn't realize that the forest had already claimed them. Reynolds halted at the crest of a hill, crouching behind a cluster of thick ferns. His eyes locked onto a small patrol of Xylothians moving below. They were armed with heavy energy rifles and scanners, their armored suits gleaming under the muted light. They were completely unaware of the humans stalking them just a few meters away. He signaled Tank. 3 targets. Take the right flank. I'll take the left. Tank's voice came through the comms, low and steady. On your mark. Reynolds didn't wait long. As the Xylothian soldiers walked into position, he exhaled, his finger brushing the trigger. 1 shot, 1 target dropped. The others barely had time to react before Tank's rifle followed suit, dropping 2 more in rapid succession. The Xylothians never stood a chance. In less than a minute, the small patrol was eliminated, their bodies slumped lifeless against the moss-covered trees. The jungle swallowed their remains in silence. Clear, Reynolds said quietly into the comms. Move forward. Stick to the plan. The rain had started in earnest now, but it was a blessing. The wet leaves and dripping branches masked any noise they made, and the Xylothians, who had no idea what they were up against, were now blindly pushing deeper into the heart of the jungle. Reynolds moved swiftly, taking in the sounds of the forest, the distant chatter of birds, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. His senses were alive. The jungle, though harsh and untamed, felt like an ally to him. It was in sync with every movement he made. As his team advanced, Reynolds thought about the bigger picture. The Xylothians thought they could simply stroll through Earth's wild places, laughing at the primitive humans who might try to stop them. They saw the jungle as a nothing more than a barrier to cross, a backdrop to their conquest. But it wasn't just the jungle they were invading, it was humanity's will to survive. The Xylothians didn't understand that. The team moved deeper, keeping to the edges of the Xylothian encampment, waiting for their next opportunity. Tank's voice interrupted the silence. Sergeant, they've got a heavy machine gun nest just up ahead. Looks like they're fortifying their position. Reynolds cursed under his breath. That was going to make things difficult. The Xylothians were getting smart. But he wasn't about to let a machine gun slow him down. Got it, he replied, a plan already forming in his mind. We need to neutralize it before they can set up fully. We're going in. The team split into 2 groups. One would deal with the machine gun nest, the other would create a diversion. Reynolds and Tank took the lead. They crouched low and moved with purpose, following the contours of the land as they approached the Xylothian position. The machine gun nest was located on a raised platform, hidden behind a large cluster of trees. But it was vulnerable, too exposed. Reynolds felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was his element. Quietly, he signaled Tank to take the left side, while he circled to the right. With the rain masking their approach, the team was able to close the gap without being detected. The moment was now. Reynolds peered through the scope of his rifle, tracking the gunner in the nest. The Xylothian was focused on the perimeter, unaware of the threat closing in from behind. He took a deep breath, steadying his aim, then pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, silent but deadly. The gunner crumpled, dropping lifeless from the nest. Tank fired his own shot a second later, taking out the second Xylothian guard who had been covering the gunner. Within moments, the machine gun nest was neutralized, its defenses shattered. But Reynolds knew this wasn't over. The Xylothians were far from defeated. They had learned their lesson. They would regroup, they would adapt. The real fight was just beginning. Stay sharp, Reynolds whispered into the comms. We've hit them hard, but they're going to come back swinging. We need to be ready. The storm grew louder, the wind picking up as the team melted back into the jungle, vanishing into the shadows. Earth's defenders had made their move. The Xylothians would regret underestimating the power of the jungle, and of humanity itself. The Xylothian forces had made a grave mistake. Their arrogance had led them to underestimate the jungle, and now it was biting back. Reynolds knew they weren't finished yet. The battle was far from over. He wasn't about to let the aliens regroup. The time for small skirmishes was past. It was time to make them pay for their invincibility complex. The air was thick with humidity as his team pressed deeper into the jungle. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a wet, stifling heat. The forest was alive with the sounds of life, chirping insects, croaking frogs, the distant roar of an unseen predator. But beneath it all, Reynolds could hear the faint crackle of his comms. "Sergeant, we've got a new problem," Tank's voice echoed through the headset, low and urgent. "Xylothians have reinforced. Big push coming our way. Looks like they're heading for the river. They've set up a perimeter." Reynolds' jaw clenched. The river was vital. The Xylothians likely thought they could cross it to gain access to other parts of the jungle. If they got control of that route, it would be all over. "Hold your ground. We're not letting them take the river," Reynolds ordered, his voice firm. "Everyone, stay low. We're moving out in 5. The team slipped through the undergrowth, their movements fluid and precise. The Xylothians had set up a defensive position on the eastern bank of the river, a collection of heavy weaponry and troops guarding the crossing. There were 2 main bridges across the waterway, both heavily fortified. The Xylothians had no idea what was about to hit them. Reynolds' mind raced as they neared the riverbank. They had no time to waste. The Xylothians had too many men, too many weapons. They would have to act fast and hard. The advantage of surprise was still on their side, but it wouldn't last long. "We'll split up. Tank, you take the right flank. Use the ridge for cover. Lancer and Rook, take the left and make a diversion. I'll go right up the middle," Reynolds said, his voice quiet but authoritative. "Keep it tight, no room for mistakes." The jungle closed in around them as they spread out, each soldier moving with purpose, knowing the stakes were higher now. The river was the key to stopping the Xylothian advance, and Reynolds would not let them cross it without a fight. His heart thudded in his chest as he closed in on the enemy position. He could see their sentries ahead, several Xylothians pacing back and forth near the base of a large tree. They were distracted, too confident in their own superiority. Reynolds could hear their laughter, the sounds of them mocking the humans. They had no idea what they were facing. The mission was clear. Reynolds was going to make them regret that laughter. He didn't hesitate. His rifle snapped up to his shoulder, the scope settling on the first target. The crack of his suppressed shot was almost imperceptible, but it was deadly. The Xylothian fell with a soft thud, crumpling to the ground without a sound. Tank's voice came through the comms, calm but urgent. "They're closing in on our position. We've got less than 5 minutes before they bring in the reinforcements." Reynolds moved, a shadow among shadows. His team was already working in perfect sync, taking out sentries before the Xylothians could react. The diversion worked. The enemy was distracted, focusing on Lancer and Rook's fake assault to the left. They didn't know they were walking right into a trap. The first bridge was within sight, a rickety wooden structure that spanned the fast-moving river. The Xylothian forces were congregating there, blocking the way, their heavy weapons set up to guard the crossing. They had no idea that the real assault was coming from all sides. Reynolds raised his hand, signaling for his team to move. Like a wave crashing on the shore, they surged forward, faster than the Xylothians could process. Tank took the high ground, positioning himself with his rifle trained on the group of soldiers guarding the bridge. In one fluid motion, Tank dropped 3 more of the enemy soldiers before they even knew what was happening. Lancer and Rook followed close behind, charging in from the left, firing suppressive shots to pin down any stragglers. The Xylothians, realizing they were under attack from multiple directions, scrambled to respond, but it was too late. Reynolds didn't wait. He sprinted toward the bridge, his rifle aimed at the remaining guards. The sound of gunfire filled the air, the metallic chatter of energy weapons ringing out in rapid succession. Xylothians were falling fast, their battle formations disintegrating under the onslaught. As he reached the edge of the bridge, Reynolds paused for a moment, surveying the chaos. He could see them, more Xylothians, rushing toward the river's edge, a second wave of reinforcements. But they were too far out. They wouldn't make it in time. "Blow the bridge," Reynolds barked into the comms. "Now." Tank's voice was cold, focused. "Copy that." Give me a second. There was a brief, tense silence before the explosion echoed through the jungle, a massive boom that shook the ground beneath their feet. The bridge erupted in a plume of smoke and fire, its wooden planks splintering and falling into the river below. The Xylothians, too far behind to react, were now cut off from their reinforcements. Reynolds turned to his team. No time to celebrate. Keep moving. The Xylothians, stunned by the loss of their bridge, began to regroup. But their morale had shattered. The jungle was no longer a convenient obstacle. It was a hostile force, and they were trapped in its depths. Reynolds knew they wouldn't give up so easily, but they were off balance, and that was all the advantage his team needed. The fight wasn't over, but with the river now impassable, the Xylothians had lost their footing. They would never cross Earth's jungles. Not if Reynolds and his team had anything to say about it. The hunt was still on, and the predators were about to strike again. The jungle had changed since the battle for the river. The Xylothians were no longer the invincible conquerors they'd believed themselves to be. Their arrogance had cost them dearly. Every decision, every miscalculation, had brought them closer to their inevitable defeat. And Sergeant Major Michael Reynolds knew they were close. The final push was coming. He stood at the edge of the dense jungle, his eyes scanning the horizon as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The Xylothians had regrouped, reinforced their position, and erected a makeshift base deep within the forest. They'd learned from their mistakes, but it was too late. Their confidence was shattered, and now they were cornered. Sergeant, Tank's voice crackled through the comms, his tone grim but resolute. They've got a full defensive perimeter set up. It's tight, but I'm seeing weaknesses. We can take them out, just need to move fast. Reynolds nodded, his gaze hardening. The Xylothians were desperate now. They were holed up, trying to fortify their position, but that made them predictable. They had no way of knowing what was coming for them. Everyone ready? Reynolds asked, his voice steady as steel. The response came back quickly. Ready, Sergeant. Let's finish this. Reynolds signaled his team, and they began to move, slipping through the underbrush like shadows. Each step was calculated, deliberate. They were closing in on the Xylothian base, and this time, the element of surprise was on their side. The enemy had underestimated Earth's soldiers, and now they were paying the price. They reached a ridge overlooking the base. Reynolds crouched low, peering through the scope of his rifle. His team was spread out in perfect formation, each soldier in position, waiting for his signal. The Xylothian forces below were oblivious, their sentries too focused on the jungle's edge. They had no idea that their end was so close. This is it, Reynolds whispered into the comms. We strike now. Tank, Lancer, Rook, you've got the outer perimeter. I'll hit the command center. No mistakes. His breath was steady, even though his pulse raced. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but there was no hesitation in his movements. He'd been trained for this. He had led countless operations before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just a mission anymore. It was personal. The first shot rang out, a sharp crack that echoed through the jungle. Tank's sniper rifle took out the first Xylothian sentry with a clean headshot. The silence that followed was only broken by the soft rustle of leaves as Lancer and Rook moved in, swiftly neutralizing the rest of the outer guards. Reynolds didn't waste a second. He darted forward, moving with the speed and precision of a predator on the hunt. His team followed, moving like a well-oiled machine. The Xylothians were still disoriented, trying to respond to the sudden attack, but they were too slow. Earth's soldiers were faster, smarter, and deadlier. Reynolds reached the command center, a makeshift structure built from heavy metal panels and camouflage netting. He could hear the Xylothians inside, shouting orders, trying to regroup. They were frantic now, the cracks in their defenses widening. 2 down, Tank reported, his voice steady. Command centers exposed. You're clear, Sergeant. On my way, Reynolds said. He burst through the entrance, his rifle raised. Two Xylothian officers looked up in shock, too slow to react. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He fired twice, dropping them both before they could even reach for their weapons. Inside the command center, chaos erupted. Xylothian soldiers scrambled for cover, but there was nowhere to hide. The humans had the upper hand now. Lancer and Rook moved in from the other side, clearing out the remaining soldiers with ruthless efficiency. The Xylothians were no match for their training. They were out of their depth, trapped in a game they couldn't win. Reynolds moved quickly, disabling the communication systems. The Xylothians had relied on their high-tech network to coordinate their forces, but without it, they were blind. The advantage was now completely in Earth's hands. Outside, the battle raged on, but the Xylothian forces were faltering. They had lost their command, their coordination, and their will to fight. They had underestimated humanity. They had underestimated Earth's warriors. "Command's down," Reynolds said into the comms. "They've lost their leadership. Time to finish this." His team moved forward again, cutting through the remaining Xylothian forces with precision and speed. The jungle was their ally, the terrain their weapon. Every tree, every shadow, every patch of underbrush became part of the trap. The Xylothians couldn't fight back. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and outclassed. But even as the battle reached its climax, Reynolds knew the Xylothians wouldn't give up easily. There was always the chance that they would regroup, that they would fight to the last. But it didn't matter. Earth's soldiers had already won. The Xylothians were broken. In the distance, Reynolds heard the sound of engines. Reinforcements. It was too late. The Xylothians had called for backup, but by the time they arrived, their forces would be in shambles. Earth had already struck a decisive blow. Reynolds surveyed the battlefield one last time, his team moving swiftly to eliminate the last pockets of resistance. The jungle was quiet again, save for the distant calls of wildlife. The Xylothians had been driven from the jungle, their dreams of conquest crushed. He allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Earth had been tested, but humanity had proven that it was not to be underestimated. The Xylothians had learned that lesson the hard way. "All clear, Sergeant," Tank reported. "Good work, everyone," Reynolds replied. His voice was calm, but there was a sense of finality in his words. "Let's head back. It's over." As the team made their way back through the jungle, the air felt different. The heavy weight of tension had lifted. The Xylothians had been defeated. The jungle was once again Earth's, and humanity's place in the universe had been reaffirmed. Reynolds looked out over the battlefield one last time. The Xylothians had come with their advanced technology and their belief in their own superiority. But it was humanity's strength, its will to survive, that had won the day. The jungle had claimed them, and Earth had emerged victorious.